Hello, my name is Kodi Henson. I'm 14 years old and I go to Creative and Performing Arts High School. Being Black, queer, disabled, trans, and neurodivergent is like living in a parallel universe. While others see the world through rose-tinted glasses, I'm not sure if my eyewear is even prescription. Being me is being oppressed no matter who's president. Being me is being ugly no matter what is trending. Being me is seeing your genuine displays of happiness reposted on cringe forums and hate threads. But you can be different. You can be what you want to be forever. Don't fall for those trans medicalists and turn your transness into a checklist. Don't bend over backwards trying to appease those TERFs. There will be homophobes whether or not you paint yourself over and be the perfect invisible queer. Go crazy. Be a Mogai, Transex, Paw Self's trans trending Tumblrina. Have contradicting labels. Go by a different name on every platform. Change your pronouns like you change shirts. If they find you, they will kill you. But first, they have to find you. And they will only find you if you lay down and let yourself die.
I'm feeling queer today.
Hello, everyone. I am Alex Masse. I use they, them pronouns.
I'm Lily Mueller. I use they, she, and he pronouns.
And we want to welcome you to I'm Feeling Queer Today, the podcast that amplifies the voices of queer youth.
At the top of the episode, we heard from Kodi, a student at Philadelphia's High School of Creative and Performing Arts, about their experience as a Black, trans, disabled young person. During this episode, we will hear more stories from queer youth about their experience at the intersection of queerness and disability, and how it affects their lives as LGBTQIA+ young people. Alex, can you talk about your experience on the spectrum?
The notes that I wrote for the introductory piece by Kodi were that it was beautiful and kind of heartbreaking. As a queer person who lives with neurodivergence and mental illness, I didn't have the words to understand what I was going through as a queer person or as someone who deals with multiple disabilities. I'm so glad that queer and disabled youth have the language that they do now. I wish I'd had that when I was younger. It would have saved me a lot of pain. It doesn't feel like so long ago that I was hearing people say like, oh, well, if you're disabled, how would you know your own sexuality and gender identity and stuff? Being queer and neurodivergent is it's a very interesting place to live because in a lot of ways it kind of isolates you from both of those communities on their own. Like, only recently have I started seeing like pride events have low sensory spaces and stuff. And it's like, I'm really glad that's happening. Where was that 10 years ago? Like,
the number of times that an effort isn't even made or there isn't even a thought put into it is shocking. A day doesn't go by where I don't beat myself up for not being able to do the things that I'm, quote, supposed to do, which is troubling. And I think, like Alex said, troubling that the same things are still maybe happening. As someone with a progressive physical disability, I have a connective tissue disorder called Ehlers-Danlos. I have the hypermobile type or type 3, which is considered the mildest. It has impacted sort of my mobility, my energy. Just you can never know a person's full story by just looking at them.
next up, we're going to hear a story from the Future Perfect Project's original series, Queer Youth Animated. In this clip, you will meet Nestie, who is not only trying to navigate an ableist world not suited for their physical limitations, but is also trying to navigate the emotional weight of coming out to their twin sister.
I'm Nestie, and I use they, them pronouns. Gender, in my case, means the flow of the river. It's ever changing. It likes to f with me sometimes. We're working on it. I didn't know how to tell my sister and how she would react to that. I don't like talking about these kind of things with her because, like, she's around me all the time. I'm kind of, like, stuck to my twins, so, like, not figuratively, actually, like, legit. Like, we're conjoined twins. We always end up talking in the shower because that's the most private place we have where no one's gonna like overhear and stuff. One of my friends, she was using my pronouns and she was like, are you gonna tell like your sister? And I was like, I didn't want to make things weird or worse or uncomfortable. I constantly worry about labeling myself and then getting backlash from other people because it'll change or whatever. Like how I say I'm gender fluid, right? I don't want to come out to our parents as that and then be like, actually, I'm not, because then I feel like it stigmatizes it because that's the only representation or visualization they have of it, you know? I feel like this goes for disabilities and gender, but I wish people would stop judging based off of what people look like. I'm sorry, just because I need help with certain things doesn't mean I can't do other things. Stop assuming everyone's neurotypical and able-bodied. Can you just make the world accessible, please? Like, we all want to live in harmony and togetherness with other people. Just let us live.
I would just like to start by saying I also feel like gender is like the flow of the river, and it also likes to with me sometimes. So thank you, Nestie, for putting that into words. I found it relatable when they said that they were having difficulty coming out to their sister, because I also like to say that I have difficulty growing in front of people. I put a lot of pressure on myself to be the same to the people in my life indefinitely, and that's just not how people work. And similarly, to how it relates to queerness, there can be pressure to be someone's representation of an entire group of people. So always remember, no one queer person, no one disabled person is representative of every person in the whole world.
There's this one thing that Nestie said that I think was something along the lines of, we all want to live in harmony and togetherness. And I feel like people should understand that, like, disabled queer people are no different from other queer people. We know what we want. And it's just very strange to me that so often our autonomy is taken from us.
Thank you, Nestie. This was wonderful. Over a year ago now, I sat down with my former professor, Dr. Joy Ellison, who is, forget the credentials, all around a wonderful person. So funny, so kind, so considerate. We've talked before on this podcast about the value of seeing yourself. Besides being a fabulous teacher and running a class that I still think about and that I learned so much from, they also probably gave a lot of students in that class, including myself, the opportunity to envision some kind of future for themselves.
Hi, I'm Lily, and I sat down with one of my professors, Dr. Joy Ellison, for a conversation about everything from disability justice,
good fast historical fact there, wow,
to queer icons.
This was really fun. I might cry.
And beyond. Dr. Ellison's current research focuses on queer and trans histories in the American Midwest. And while this was fascinating to hear about, I was also excited to interview them because we have some identities in common. It's really rare as a young queer person to have real people to look up to, so I'd like to thank Dr. Ellison for sitting with me, but also for being an all-around amazing person and educator. If I remember, you were raised on the West Coast, so why trans histories in the Midwest?
Good question. I'm originally from the Portland, Oregon area, but I moved to Chicago about 15 years ago. It's been a while. The Midwest is certainly special to me, but more than that, I started looking at transgender history in the Midwest because we have in the literature all of this research about New York City and California. And there's no way to believe that those are representative of the entire country. What also happens when we, particularly around trans people, when we overrepresent New York and California, is that there's a series of extremely transphobic outbursts at feminist events in 1973. And that creates this impression that feminists were always hostile to trans women. And that's not even an accurate read of those events, but it's certainly not an accurate read of what it was like in the Midwest. So that's what started me on this journey of trying to figure out more about what's going on in the Midwest. And what I found is that in the Midwest, you have overlapping communities because people have a real sense of isolation. So a lot of the gay bars were, in fact, also places that trans people were active parts of that community. And when we look at some of these other community formations, we see that trans people were an important part of feminist movements and were an important part of creating the very idea of an LGBT community.
So, question, was there anti-trans rhetoric in 73 because Roe was passed?
That's a really good guess, but it actually didn't have much to do with that. It was partially coincidental and partially when pride parades just got really big. I am still really, really obsessed with the first group that I researched as a part of this project called TLC, the Transvestite Transsexual Law Committee. They started in the very early 70s in Chicago after a Black trans femme named James Clay Jr. was murdered by Chicago police. James Clay's murder galvanized the entire Chicago, what we now call LGBT community, but really at the time was the gay liberation movement. But no one had done any research on trans people specifically. TLC was the first formal trans organization in Chicago, and it spread into this regional network that was really radical in its own idiosyncratic sort of way. They were prison abolitionists, as far as we could tell from the literature. They were interested in helping trans people survive and were really, really good at creating networks and relationships. So they actually had for several years a really active relationship with a Chicago lesbian separatist organization. And it's really, really interesting because for a few years, TLC and this group called the Flippies worked together really closely. And then this kind of proto-TERF ideology really took root in a deeper way. And all of the issues that had really brought these two organizations together took a back seat. But I think that we can still look at this history and say, wow, trans people have been feminists since the beginning of the 70s, if not before that. And there are these possibilities for coalitions, and it's not something new.
What do you think you've learned in your research so far, just in life, about building coalitions?
One thing that I feel like I've learned from my research and also my life is that social change really does take all sorts of different people, and that sometimes people that we passionately disagree with, we will look back and say, wow, I was right to disagree with them, but I can see what they contributed. And that's something that I see really clearly in my research. There's this almost domino effect of becoming closer and closer and closer and more comfortable with the queer community that's led by these people who originally identify as cross-dressers and come to understand themselves as trans women, and specifically as trans lesbians and queer women. And they really create the LGBT community. They build this coalition.
Do disability and queer studies intersect for you? I know queer folks are more likely to be disabled.
So for me, they're very intertwined for a few reasons. One is they're intertwined in my life. And two, I think that the kind of radical disability justice activism that I'm interested in has been contributed to by queer and trans disabled people in a really powerful way. And then kind of in a third way, I think that ableism is a system that really often holds other systems together. That we really can't talk about racism, for example, without talking about disability, because what a central idea of anti-Blackness is that Black people are less intelligent than white people. That means that we're projecting disability onto Blackness. And so there's no way to get out of that. And it gets even more specific. During enslavement in the United States, enslavers who were doctors used disability as an excuse to continue enslaving people. So they created this disease called drapetomania, which is what they called the urge to run away. So yeah, so really anyone who has the audacity to run away is disabled. And you know what this is really shocking. The treatment for drapetomania was beating people. There's this way in which we can't separate these things. And the same thing is true for transphobia. When we look at sexology, even some of the heroes of early research on trans people were actually also eugenicists and were interested in figuring out what kinds of gender non-normativity and sexuality was good and should be passed along and what should not be. And there's this whole history of trans people and arguments about who should be able to get married and who should not. And then also we have all sorts of trans people, some of whom were disabled and some of whom were not, using the rhetoric of disability to try to get rights or rejecting disability, or using rhetoric around rehab, which is an interesting sort of part of disability history where a lot of kind of assimilationist civil rights advancements for disabled people has been in the name of rehabilitation. And trans people use some of the same rhetoric at various times. So I'm fascinated by how this is all operating. And also, I think that disability justice movements are some of the most important and potentially powerful movements that are happening right now. I think it's a vantage point from which people can see the intersections between capitalism and all sorts of looming crises that we're going to have to deal with. I'm always excited to talk about disability and always excited to be around other disabled people, honestly.
The disability justice movement has definitely accelerated in the past 2 years, especially the disability pride movement online and in person. Is there anything you feel like you'd really like to know, achieve, or accomplish either with the research or in life in the next 10 years or so? Basically, what's your optimistic hope for the world to come?
In the short run, I'm just incredibly excited to get to share everything that I've learned with my community, and I'm hoping to be able to have the resources to make that as accessible for as many people as possible, both like in terms of disability access, but also just in terms of ease of finding the information, translating that information into something that's interesting and entertaining. I'm also in the future really interested in working on non-binary history in the United States, but I am particularly excited that the environmental justice movement is becoming more and more aware and aligned with racial justice struggles in particular. I hope it can get on board with disability justice. It seems like disabled people are always the last to get just imagined as existing. And personally, what I would really love to see is more social justice movements that are actually accessible to people with disabilities. I'm really trying to figure out how to recenter myself in communities that are more accessible to me. And I think that if we can start talking about that, it could just be really a key to so much movement building. We could start having movements that people want to be involved in, movements that are accessible to parents, movements that don't valorize getting incredibly traumatized and then provide no supports for people, right? And maybe we can actually have people that are able to stay in the movement for more than like 5 years. There's no way we're going to win if we can't create movements that people can stay involved in and want to be involved in, and that are accessible to as many people as possible.
I'd like to again thank Joy for sharing their time with me. If you're interested, you can find some of their research and other ongoing projects online.
Bye.
Gosh, that was just such an incredible segment. I'm so glad that you have this person in your life, Lily. I can't imagine like having a full, like, even just like one semester with them. That just sounds amazing. My big takeaway from this entire segment was I just wrote down, keep us undeniable. And I think that's a lot of the work that Joy is doing, is just like kind of preserving and uplifting history where it is so often like denied or erased. Like, so often you hear these narratives of like, oh, this person like started in a small town, but there were no gays there. So they went to like New York or California and the Midwest, and every place that wasn't California or New York was just an absolute desert for the gays. Like that's a narrative that I hear a lot. And like there's no doubt that like these spaces were invaluable to queer history, but I think it's important to also kind of represent the stories that didn't take place there. Like, yeah, it was just really exciting to hear about someone doing that work. Keep us undeniable.
I loved learning more about the history of feminism and that it wasn't always or overall transphobic, because I think a lot of times you hear like TERF rhetoric, it's like, this is away from the roots of feminism. It's all about cis women, where it's like, actually, no, that's not the truth. For those of you who may not know, TERF, or trans exclusionary radical feminist, is sort of a subsection of a quote-unquote feminist movement that is, as the name suggests, trans exclusionary, and often sort of riddled with other systems of oppression that we've discussed. We're going to have a glossary of this term and a few other queer and disabled terms for you in the show notes, should you need it. On the whole, something that I know that I learned from this and that I learned from their class that I still carry with me is the idea of coalition, so connections across difference. And that, as they say, social change does take all sorts of different people, and that you don't necessarily have to agree with a person on all fronts to join together for an issue. And I think that's something super important. Yay for coalitions. And the last thing I'll say is that we didn't get into it here, but did you know that in the United States, disabled people still do not have marriage equality?
Oh, right.
Yeah, as of July 2024, when we were recording this, if you receive disability benefits from the state, you are not allowed to have more than $2,000 in life savings. So many people do not get married because doing so means they lose their benefits, which they depend on for medical care and survival. I would just want to attack the idea that people are on disability because they're lazy. Disability is incredibly difficult to receive and apply for. It's a system designed to keep you in poverty or kill you, to be honest. That connects to eugenics, but I talk a lot. Moving on.
Yeah, I just want to add a comment from our lovely editor, Julie. She just said she had to go to a commitment ceremony because of that reason. Otherwise, the happy couple would have gotten married. That just reminds me so deeply of like the various ceremonies that queer folks had to do before we were allowed to get married. It truly all is intertwined. We're just about at the end of this episode, and we are going to have a queer crush segment from my lovely co-host, Lily. I love how different queer and autistic perceptions of attraction and affection can be. And also, I've always found queer puppy love to be so very special and so very sweet. Like, if straight people get to talk about how cute and innocent their puppy love is, we get that right too. So yeah, enjoy this lovely little segment. It is so sweet.
I was the kid with depression, but I'm also autistic, and my notions of things like love and monogamy and attraction and the whole bit, they're a little abstract, a little fluid, a little loosey-goosey on the whole thing. I didn't get crushes really frequently, especially not when I was little, so it was really new and special and sacred, and I'm definitely an overly sentimental person, but I do feel like the love that we experience as children can be some of the most beautiful we experience in our entire lifetime. I didn't know my first crush was a crush at the time, and I think I didn't until years had passed, and like part of it might have been the whole like queerness taboo. It was a Catholic school. We went to a pre-K through 8 school, and this crush, I really hope she's not listening, that would be embarrassing as hell. Anyway, she was a girl I spent 9 years of my life with. She was this little beanpole of a dancer that reminded me of Strawberry Lemonade, and she was the fastest runner in the class, which is big social capital when you're 5. I have all these really fond memories of growing up with her and visiting her and playing with her little siblings and her pets. We were in a musical together. We'd run around the playground. I'm really grateful that I got to experience that sort of like tender, curious, demand-free love, even if it wasn't really spoken. We've never talked about it, but we both grew up to be queer, and we're still in touch. I really love how in the queer community love can be ambiguous and friendships can be like romantic, passionate, and committed. This first crush felt, to be honest, I was really young, so probably felt like most crushes. I just wanted to be around this person all the time, and I feel really lucky to have such precious memories. I sound so sappy, but that is because I am.
If we're talking life stories, I hope this one's still being written. The pieces are all there. Weird gender, weird brain, books upon books of strange, sappy, sapphic art. But I'm not done. Hopefully nowhere close. Is it prose? Is it melody? I don't know. Who needs binaries? Not me. If this is a book, the ink hasn't dried. If it's a song, the mix isn't final. If it's a play, you know what they say, the show must go on. Right now, perhaps it's best as a bard's tale, a story only spoken, a song that's so ephemeral, upon a stage that's wherever I place my feet. Gather round, you know the whole bit. Lavenders grow from my skin in my sleep. I cut off my hair and feel incredibly full. A new hyperfixation gets me through hell. My existence is radical, and I live to affirm that in others. And hopefully get a standing ovation along the way.
Thank you for joining us today. I'm Lily Mueller.
And I'm Alex Masse. And you've been listening to I'm Feeling Queer Today.
If you like what you hear, please rate us and share the show with your friends or family or both. And don't forget to ask yourself, how am I feeling queer today?
For more information and resources about this episode, as well as a glossary of some of the terms that we've used in this episode, check out the show notes in the description or visit the episode page at thefutureperfectproject.org/podcast.
We want to hear from you. That's why we set up our very own online voicemail box for you, our listeners, to leave us recorded messages. Let us know what you think of the latest episode, or share topics that you'd like to hear us cover on the pod. All you have to do is go to speakpipe.com/IFQT to make your voice heard. That's speakpipe.com/IFQT. And who knows, your response might just end up in a future episode.
If you or a young person you know between the ages of 13 to 24 is currently in crisis, check out thetrevorproject.org for LGBTQIA+ specific support through text and chat, or call 1-866-488-7386. We will also include this information in the show notes as resources.
To learn more about the Future Perfect Project and all of our free arts programming with LGBTQIA+ youth, visit thefutureperfectproject.org or find us on social media at The Future Perfect Project.
I'm Feeling Queer Today is produced by the Future Perfect Project with support from Radio Kingston, WKNY, Kingston, New York. This episode was produced by me, Alex Masse,
and me, Lily Mueller. Thank you, Kodi, for sharing your original writing, and Dr. Joy Ellison for sharing your knowledge in such an unbelievable interview. Nestie's story was produced by Emma Jane Zaslawski and scored by Brandon Grugel as part of FPP's original series, Queer Youth Animated, available on YouTube.
Additional thanks to the rest of the lovely I'm Feeling Queer Today production team. Eric Eubank, Wallace, Frankie Gunn, Claire Florence, Trudy Pooks,
Zorian Edwards, Sam Smalls, Sonny May Blanco, and Ari. Our theme song was composed and performed by Alex Masse and produced by Emma Jane Sosowski. Additional music composed by Alex Masse and Epidemic Sound. Episode mixing and mastering by Julie Novak with assistance from Emma Jane Sosowski.
Special thanks as well to executive producers and mentors Julie Novak and Celeste Lassine, as well as Future Perfect Project team members Ryan Amador, Kiko Wan, and Aaliyah Jamil.